This is Australia, a country of over 26 million people that has long been seen as one of the best countries to live in the world, consistently ranking near the top of global quality of life indicators, including social security, healthcare, and education. So it's no wonder that it's also a country that has long attracted migration, welcoming more than 2,000 migrants a day in 2023. Swelling the country's population by a record 659,800. So in recent years, concerns have emerged regarding the country's trajectory, with many Australians feeling that their nation is facing significant challenges, a problem that can't be denied. To that, migration has become a particularly controversial issue, sparking debates about social cohesion, resource allocation, and the future direction of a nation that was once called the most desirable country in the world. As a result, public opinions have shifted, and Australians are taking a stronger stance than ever when it comes to immigration. It's about the number of people who have been brought into the country under this Prime Minister and nowhere for them to leave. It's just simple maths. 50% of Australians believe that immigration has made them poorer. They are correct, because our living standards are some of the worst that we have seen in decades. Is the government going to cut immigration to match housing availability, or are we just going to keep going until every regular working Australian is homeless? Australia is anything but an affordable place to live right now, and I would have thought it would be the opposite, where no one is moving to Australia right now, especially not from the UK. Today, on Across the Globe, we'll be exploring why Australia is suddenly declaring war on immigration. In 2019 and 2020, immigration to Australia ground to a halt due to the pandemic, leading to a notable shrinkage of the Australian population for the first time since World War I. This sudden pause in migration marked a significant turning point for a nation that has historically relied on the influx of immigrants to bolster its economy and demographic diversity. Back in 2018, a substantial 63% of Australians agreed that accepting immigrants from various countries strengthens the nation. However, by 2025, over a third of the country supports the act of deporting asylum seekers to their country of origin, with growing concerns over the pressures that immigration, particularly permanent migration, may place on services and infrastructure. Since the Howard government, temporary visa numbers have been uncapped, resulting in their rapid growth outpacing that of permanent visas. But this trend has put more focus on permanent migration policies, leading to a closer look at the issue dating back to the 1990s. Many Australians credit migration as a key factor in the country's recovery from the recession of the early 1990s, viewing it as a vital component that rejuvenated the economy and contributed to the nation's culture. However, not everyone shares this perspective. Since the late 1990s, Australia has faced a significant challenge with asylum seekers arriving by boat, often fleeing conflict zones such as Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and various Middle Eastern countries, typically making the risky journey through Indonesia. These maritime arrivals peaked in the early 2000s and again around 2012 to 2013, with over 20,000 individuals seeking refuge annually. The impacts of Australia's immigration policy, particularly in relation to asylum seekers, were profoundly shaped by the Tampa affair in 2001, an incident that marked a turning point in the nation's approach to border protection. But we will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come. When the MV Tampa, a Norwegian container ship, rescued over 400 asylum seekers stranded at sea, the Australian government refused entry to the ship and its desperate passengers. This event catalyzed a hardline stance on immigration, emphasizing the government's commitment to border security and the prevention of unauthorized maritime arrivals. The public's fear of losing control over Australia's borders clashed with the humanitarian concerns for the individuals seeking refuge, resulting in a divided debate within society. The UN Human Rights Commission has ruled that Australia must quickly help two stranded citizens return home after they argued the federal government's border policy breaches human rights laws. In response to the situation regarding asylum seekers and the political fallout from events like the Tampa affair, Australia implemented a series of policy responses designed to deter boat arrivals and manage border security more effectively. Among the most significant was the Pacific Solution, introduced in 2001, which involved offshore processing of asylum claims on Nauru and Manus Island. This policy aimed to prevent asylum seekers from reaching the Australian mainland by relocating them to remote facilities for processing, thereby asserting stronger control over maritime arrivals. In the 6 years following, 23 boats arrived in Australia compared to 43 carrying more than 5,000 asylum seekers in 2001 alone. Then, in 2013, Australia introduced Operation Sovereign Borders, a militarized approach that included the controversial practice of boat turnbacks, intercepting vessels attempting to reach Australia and returning them to their point of departure. These policies successfully reduced the number of boat arrivals seeking asylum, but many countries criticized them for being inhumane. However, while human rights groups have consistently criticized Australia's border policies, some nations have sought to emulate Australia's approach to immigration control, with the BBC playfully claiming that Australia wrote the Stop the Boats playbook. Denmark serves as a notable example of a country that has drawn inspiration from Australia's stringent border policies, implementing its own measures aimed at deterring irregular migration. Denmark's government, particularly under the leadership of right-wing parties, introduced a series of stringent immigration policies that mirrored Australia's methods. These included enhancing border controls, tightening regulations on family reunification, and advocating for the processing of asylum seekers in offshore facilities. Those processed offshore do not have the same rights of review as those processed in Australia. And if they are found to be refugees, they may have to wait many years until they are resettled. Australia's implementation of offshore detention for asylum seekers has also been a focal point of controversy, generating significant public outcry and tarnishing the country's international image. Reports of abuse, mental health crises, and the detention of children highlighted the 2014 Human Rights Commission inquiry, raising serious ethical concerns about the treatment of vulnerable individuals in these facilities. Financially, the cost of maintaining offshore detention surged to over $1 billion Australian dollars annually at its peak, while detainees often languished for years in limbo, enduring indefinite detainment without resolution. Although the system has largely wound down, Manus Island was closed in 2017 and Nauru has been scaled back, its legacy continues to provoke harsh legal and ethical debates about the balance between border security and human rights in Australia. But what draws so many people to the country? Much like how the United States is considered the land of opportunity, attracting millions of migrants per year, Australia is seen as a place where there are better economic opportunities, more relaxed lifestyle, and overall better quality of life. In 2021, Australia had the highest median wealth per individual at $273,900, nearly tripling the United States' $93,270 median wealth per individual. In terms of mean wealth, the average Australian adult had $550,110 in 2021, after seeing an annual increase of $66,350 in their net worth. This put Australia at number 4 in the world, after Switzerland, the United States, and Hong Kong. Though not the highest globally, Australia's average salary is relatively high compared to many other countries. According to World Data, the average salary in Australia is $63,150. Compare that with the United Kingdom's $47,700 and France's $45,180, and it's easy to see why so many people want to pack their bags and head to the land down under. Furthermore, many careers offer extensive health cover. Approximately 13.6 million Australians, or more than half the population, have private health insurance. According to Choice, 54.6% of Australians have extras cover, 44.8% have hospital cover, and most people have a combined health insurance policy. So surely this leads to an overall feeling of content. Well, Australia has long been seen as a place where nearly everyone is happy, riding waves, enjoying the sun, and throwing another shrimp on the barbie. In 2024, Australia was named as the 10th happiest country in the world. However, the happiness ranking for under 30s in Australia was 19, while it jumped back to 9 for over 60s. The report showed that young people are struggling the most, and many put this down to the rise in migration. In May 2024, The Guardian reported that Australia's housing affordability crisis will continue to worsen with a significant shortfall in supply. A report cited the resumption of migration at pace as one of the number one factors making the long-running housing shortfall more acute, which the coalition has used to argue for creation of a link between the net migration intake and housing completions. Simply put, the housing market hasn't kept up with the surge in migration. To better understand this, it's worth noting that this isn't simply an issue that comes down to legal migration status or even the rise of illegal immigration, but also the rate of people essentially overstaying their welcome. Firstly, visa extensions for international students are intensifying Australia's rental market strain, challenging migration targets. Visa overstays in Australia present a significant yet often overlooked challenge within the broader context of immigration policy, with estimates suggesting that around 60,000 to 70,000 legal visitors overstay their visas annually, far outnumbering boat arrivals but receiving less public and media attention. Many of these individuals turn to illegal work, frequently finding themselves in exploitative situations within industries such as hospitality and construction, where they are vulnerable to poor working conditions, underpayment, and lack of job security. According to ABC News, 1 in 6 migrant workers were exploited. However, many Australians are also paid below the national minimum wage. They noted that reports suggest between 5% and 16% of employed recently arrived migrants, or between 27,000 and 82,000 workers, are paid below the national minimum wage of $21.38 for adults over the age of 21, compared to up to 9% of all Australian workers, and between 1.5% and 8% of recent migrants, between 6,500 and 42,000 people, are underpaid by at least $3 an hour. In response to this issue, government raids and deportations have spiked in the 2020s, aiming to crack down on unlawful employment and encourage compliance. In November 2024, over 80,000 people were susceptible to deportation from Australia to non-EU countries paid to take them under Labour's new bill, which has been likened to the UK's failed Rwanda deportation plan. But is Australia failing just like the UK? Well, Michael Thomas, the Home Affairs Department's Group Manager of Immigration Compliance, revealed that those on a removal pathway included an estimated 75,400 people with no valid visa in the Australian community, 4,452 people on bridging visa E, so they can make acceptable arrangements to depart Australia, 986 people in immigration detention, and 193 in community detention. However, in December 2024, the Australian Bureau of Statistics revealed that there were 150,530 more long-term or permanent arrivals than departures. So it seems this issue is only getting worse. Crime is another pressing issue that possibly entangles itself into the wave of migration. What happened here might seem like an isolated murder and drugs case, but Alward Bieber wasn't only running crop houses. He was part of an Albanian mafia syndicate, one of many flourishing around the country. It's been described as a betrayal, a border force official accused of accepting bribes in exchange for ignoring a huge shipment of cocaine. In the last few years, social media has become a hotbed for discussion surrounding migrant crime rates, keeping the issue at the forefront of public consciousness. A particularly alarming incident in February 2024 saw 7 immigration detainees released in Australia who had been convicted of homicide or attempted homicide, fueling further outrage and concern. Additionally, the Home Affairs Department disclosed that 24 former detainees have been charged with visa rule breaches or state offenses since their release, intensifying anxieties around public safety and migration policy. Also, the issue of climate refugees has become increasingly pressing as Pacific Island nations confront the existential threat of rising sea levels due to climate change. Despite its position as a regional leader, Australia has been reluctant to adopt formal frameworks recognizing the plight of climate refugees, opting instead for temporary schemes, such as those for Tuvaluans. Australia's refusal to create lasting policies hurts affected communities, damages relationships with neighbors, and invites criticism from other countries. As climate change gets worse, ignoring climate refugees could create more problems in this already troubled region. In conclusion, Australia has a long-standing tradition of guarding its borders and managing migration, but recent developments indicate a significant escalation in these efforts. The current migration situation is heavily influenced by the nation's housing crisis, which has become a pressing concern for many Australians. In response to the rising tide of immigration, the government has capped the number of new international students it accepts, fearing that their arrival could exacerbate an already strained housing market. In 2021, it was estimated that over 122,000 people in Australia were experiencing homelessness, highlighting the acute need for adequate housing solutions. As the situation progressed, projections for 2024-2025 suggested that Australia would struggle to accommodate more than 74,000 new foreign migrants due to a sharp decline in building approvals, the lowest level seen in more than a decade. So it's evident that this predicament is not new for Australia. Now it's struggling with these issues again, following a familiar pattern. Once celebrated as a land of welcome, Australia now finds itself in troubled waters, where the complexities of modern migration underscore deeper societal fractures. The legacy of immigration, beginning with British colonization in 1788, continues to impact negotiations around sovereignty and land rights for Indigenous Australians, a raw wound that remains sensitive today. The rejected 2023 voice referendum highlighted how modern mass migration can reignite discussions around Indigenous influence, with some arguing that increasing immigration dilutes their voice in the national conversation. In this context, the issues at play transcend mere policy. They tap into cultural undercurrents shaping Australia's identity. As the country faces mounting pressures from both immigration and the historical implications of the past, one must ask, could it be that history is repeating itself once again? Only time will tell. What about why living in France has become impossible?